Happy St. Patrick's Day, happy Friday, welcome back. It's lovely to see you all for what is our second last transdisciplinary seminar for the winter term. We are so pleased to be joined today by Dr. Micaela Trimble, visiting scholar, who we are very fortunate to have here with us. Also welcome to some friends from Waterloo who are here joining us. So before I hand over the floor, I'd just like to introduce you a little bit to Dr. Trimble. Mika is an associate researcher at the South American Institute for Resilience and Sustainability Studies in Uruguay. She holds a PhD in Natural Resources and Environmental Management from the University of Manitoba. Her areas of expertise include environmental governance, stakeholder participation, and adaptive co-management of social-ecological systems. And in that space, she works in many different fields, including small-scale fisheries, marine protected areas, and freshwater systems. So something for everyone today. And she's got a geographic focus primarily in South America. So thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today to give this seminar. I'm very pleased to be here again at Brock, where I was a few years ago through a postdoctoral fellowship at the Environmental Sustainability Research Center. And so, well, as Jessica said, I work at SARAS Institute in Uruguay, where I conduct different research projects on fisheries, water governance, and I'll be bringing some of that to the seminar today. Also, I'd like to say that I'm a member of the Scientific Steering Committee of INVER, which is the Integrated Marine Biosphere Research Project aiming at global sustainability, and it was through that I got a fellowship from SCORE, the Scientific Committee on Oceanic Research, to be here in Canada with Derek Armitage at the University of Waterloo this week, and also happy to be involved now with the B2B project, this global partnership on vulnerability to viability of small-scale fisheries. And so the topic of today's seminar is around participation and participatory governance of watersheds and fisheries, and I will explain later why those systems. But let me just start by saying that I'm passionate about participation. So since I started my doctoral studies in 2009, I've been looking at participation in different ways and different kinds, participation in management, participation in research, and participatory approaches more in general. And so in Uruguay, as worldwide, there is this increasing trend towards participation in environmental management. In particular, it's since the early 2000s, in which there has been different changes in legislation or reforms in legislation that have allowed for the creation or implementation of different kinds of multi-stakeholder councils involving government and non-government actors, and these are usually consultative or advisory councils or boards giving some advice towards like management of, let's say, protected areas, small-scale fisheries, watersheds, among others. And so why watersheds and fisheries? So I've always, like, since I was a child, I spent lots of time on the coast, and so for my doctoral research, I got engaged with the small-scale fisheries sector. And at that time, this transition towards participatory management was just starting. So I was interested in looking at how that new legislation was going to change the way that the fishery was managed and so on. And over the years, I will tell you that story later, but over the years, I found out that a similar situation had been undergoing in watersheds, and that similar councils composed on government and non-government actors had been formed, and so I said, let's look into that. And so I will be telling you the story of of the watersheds governance as well. And so in the two cases, both watersheds and fisheries are considered social-ecological systems, since they are composed of multiple components on the ecological and socio-political sides, and these components interact, and we cannot predict how they are going to behave. And so there are multiple stakeholders involved, and multiple views that these stakeholders bring. So it's valuable to bring them together and see how these systems can be managed. Let me give you a bit of an introduction to Uruguay in case you don't know much about this country. So it's a small country, 3.5 million of population, located in South America, in between Argentina and Brazil. It's a country where the main economic activities are livestock, agriculture, and tourism as well. As you can see in the map at the very right side, the country is full of water resources, rivers and streams everywhere. However, increasingly we have more and more water quality and water quantity issues. The fisheries sector is not an important one in terms of GDP, let's say. However, the small-scale fisheries sector are a very important activity socio-economically and also culturally for many coastal and inland communities. So I will tell you first the fisheries story, and then I will move to the watersheds, and finally I will bring some conclusions from the two cases, or the two systems. So in general terms, there are two fisheries sectors in Uruguay, the small scale, there on the left, on the large scale. I'll be focusing on the small scale, which represent 50% of the total workers of these systems. And in 2013, so when I was, during my 4 years of PhD, there was a legislation under review, a new fisheries law that for the first time would bring or would include statements about fisher participation in decision making. And it was in late 2013 when that law was finally passed in the parliament. And so for the first time, there's legislation determining that fishers should have some sort of participation in decision making. The goal of that legislation was to ensure resource conservation and sustainable development. One of the triggers for that law was that most species were fully exploited, and also there was some international pressure, the Code of Conduct for responsible fisheries, saying or calling for more stakeholder participation. And so this law talks a little bit about fisher participation and the implementation of co-management councils, consultative councils. So the law says that there are 3 different kinds or types of councils that will be formed at different scales. So these are all presided over by the National Directorate for Aquatic Resources, which is part of the Ministry of Livestock, Agriculture and Fisheries. At the national level, a National Fisheries Council was formed, and that involves the small-scale and the large-scale fisheries sectors, and it involves different ministries and multiple actors. And then the other 2 in blue, those regard small-scale fisheries actors. And so the difference between the 2 is that zonal councils involve fishers from multiple locations and not just a single location. In total, 11 of those councils for small-scale fisheries have been formed since the law was passed, or actually a little bit before the law was passed. They started to try with some pilot areas. Let's don't look at the right side, because that's the National Council, which I already told you a little bit about. And so these the councils for consultative co-management of small-scale fisheries They involve representatives of DINARA, which is the fisheries agency, also local governments, municipal and subnational, the Coast Guard, which is in charge of fisheries safety at sea, and also representatives of small-scale fishers. And the law also states that the decisions of these councils will not be binding on the administration. So that means that DINARA or the ministry may not decide to do what the council is proposing to do in terms of management decisions. So formally, the duties of these councils, according to a decree that was passed a few years after that law, says, so these councils are for exchange and discussion among the actors, coordinations between the institutions involved, participation in decision-making, and also that they aim at responsible use of fish resources, biodiversity and ecosystem conservation, and sustainable development. So maybe by now you all are thinking, this looks great. Well, we will see in practice. On this map, Ryan is laughing over there, he always does. Okay, so on this map you can see where the first 8 councils were formed. This map is kind of outdated right now, there are 11 in total. But just to give you an idea that they are located on coastal Uruguay, also inland. Before, in 2012, so before the law was passed, DINARA, with international or external support, tried in 3 pilot areas to form these councils and see how they work. Actually, it was at that time when they realized that they couldn't form zonal councils before forming local councils. Fishers in Uruguay are usually not organized, and so you cannot start by bringing together fishers from different locations if you don't start working on a particular site. And also let me say that before these councils, there was no venue for interaction between the government and the fishers. So this meant an important change in the way these 2 parties or main parties in co-management interact with one another. So during my time here at Rock and the postdoctoral fellowship that I mentioned, and I worked with Ryan, we conducted a participatory evaluation of one of these pilot councils that were formed in coastal Uruguay. And at that time, well, this was a very early stage process of co-management, and this also meant the first evaluation of any of the existing councils at the moment. At that time, there were 3. And so let me tell you a little bit of this council. So it involved fishers from 2 locations, which were very one next to the other. So there was a common fishing area on the Rio de la Plata estuary. The participating stakeholders were the same as stated by the law, and they would address topics that were of interest to the fishers regarding the access to fishing license or the use of the coastal strip and other kind of things. However, the main issue that we found at first was that when that pilot project ended, and it was DINARA, the fisheries agency, that was going to be in charge of the council, the frequency of meetings was really reduced, and the way of operation also changed, and that was assessed in a critical way by the different actors besides DINARA, who was in charge of that and who had critical comments about the project that had initiated the council. So here you can see a couple of pictures of what we did for participatory evaluation workshops. These were all members of people, stakeholders who had participated in the council. They were council members. Actually, at that time, they were not having sessions of the council, so they felt that these workshops were council meetings. Council meetings looking at the evaluation of the council, which was, at first it was kind of shocking to me, but on the other side, it was good because they were really valuing the opportunity to evaluate what they were doing. And they were aiming at improving what wasn't working well at the council. Also, before doing these workshops, we did interviews with the different stakeholders, and I also have been involved as an observer, participant observer in meetings of the councils. So I already had an idea of how each actor perceived the council. And actually in the first one of these workshops, what I first did was to bring in, to share with everyone the main findings of the interview so that we could discuss from there. I wouldn't say who said what, but I would bring like the general comment in terms of strengths and weaknesses and suggestions for improving and things like that. And also after doing that, we facilitated a discussion around indicators to evaluate the council. And so we found that the indicators that were important to stakeholders had to do with the flaws of the council. So in a way, they were trying to monitor, for instance, the frequency of the meetings because it was like really low, or the continuity of participants because the Coast Guard would always send a different representative, and so there was not a continuity in the relationship building. Eco-management is a lot about trust building and relationships, and if people are changing, then you gotta build that trust, for instance. Throughout this process, trust increased to some extent. We found that, and we did interviews to investigate that. However, we also found that trust didn't increase that much. So fishers would still mistrust the data and the other way around. So just to share the main strengths and weaknesses that they agreed regarding the council. This is like a summary version of the findings because, in fact, we found that different actors have different perspectives. So you could, like, as expected, right? You could expect that fishers wouldn't have the same perspective than Dinara and, well, same with the other actors. And so, for instance, in terms of positive aspects of the councils, the members valued positively to have the opportunity for face-to-face interaction with the fishers, with the government, and the other way around, and also to be able to build new relationships or to improve the existing relationships. Also, they highlighted the opportunity to look together or in a participatory way for solutions to the problems of the local fishery. And also, some of them said that a few issues, a few problems have been resolved, not many though, and so the issue around having the right fishing license and all that, like formal requirements to go fishing and things like that. Also, and this will be highlighted more by government actors, they said that the council, the creation of the council allowed fishers to organize better and to decide which fisher was going to represent them in the council. And yeah, that's in terms of strengths. On the other column of the table, you can see the weaknesses. And they are, the main one had to do with the low efficiency and the low autonomy of the council. So there was sometimes over-discussion of topics without getting nowhere and without finding any solution to the topics. And also, something that also is like a good example of the low autonomy of the council was that every little single thing that the council decided that they wanted to do had to be approved by the director, the general director of the fisheries agency. So even like contacting another government agency to find out something, like how do we do this? No. You cannot do this. We need approval first. Of course that was problematic and that took a lot of time. I've heard that has been changing, fortunately, and so they now have a little more autonomy. However, this one council, like we didn't pick the right one, you know, like it never, like, I mean, it was cancelled, it no longer operates, you know. So, yeah. Also, another weakness was that some government agencies, they wouldn't show much like a deep commitment to the council. So they would be there at the meeting because they had to, but they wouldn't really engage in the discussions or activities that were proposed or things like that. The frequency of meetings was low, as I said. And because of these and other problems of the councils, fishers from one of the two sides decided to quit. And they wrote a letter and they said, we are no longer involved because this council is not useful, we are wasting time, and things like that. And those fishers actually didn't want to get involved in the participatory evaluation of the council. They were open to be interviewed and to talk at the fishing side and things like that, but they weren't to be part of it because they had made a decision of not coming back, not returning to the council meetings. And here is a timeline of this governance transition in small-scale fisheries. So in 2012, the first fisheries councils were formed because of this this project, external funding and pilot areas. In 2013, the new fisheries law was passed on, and I have the camera there, sorry. Over the years, councils were formed in different parts of the country. Some of those that were formed stopped operating, so not all of them continued as we had hoped. In 2016, for instance, that was the last meeting of this particular council that I told you about, where we did the participatory evaluation. Only 5 years after the law was passed, there was this regulatory decree which says the duties of the councils and a little bit of how they should operate. Actually, the law stated that that decree had to be made within 3 months. So those 3 months became 5 years. And that's something like very common in Uruguay, unfortunately, regarding legislation. And even the regulatory decree, that one states that each council has 90 days. Apparently everything is 90, you know. Each council has 3 months to work and define their rules, internal rules for operation. So a few months ago, I gave a call to a person who works at the Fisheries Agency, and let me say that Uruguay is such a small country that you can do 2 phone calls and get to the president. I didn't need to talk with the president for this, so it was even easier. And so I called this a person, and I said, because I was working on another presentation, and I thought I need some updated data, you know, about the councils. So I would like to ask you how many of the 11 councils have their own internal regiment or their rules. What are those rules? Oh, you know, the decree says this and that. This was a WhatsApp conversation. I stated the text of the decree. I wasn't aware of that, she said. It's like, really? I was shocked. Shocked, really. So, also, like, there are 3 people at the Fisheries Agency in charge of everything regarding small-scale fisheries in the whole country. Some of the things that they have to do are with regard to the councils, but many of the things do not. But if they didn't even know that it was required to work on these rules, then, I mean, they were not even like planning to do that. Also, I took the opportunity to share with them the findings from the work of the participatory evaluation, where the different stakeholders involved had proposed operational rules because they didn't have none. And the lack of rules and norms meant that the NARA could do it the way they wanted. And maybe now, like today or this year, I call 2 meetings, and next year, oh, I don't have the time, so I don't call the meetings, and things like that. So unfortunately, that's the situation right now. And only 4 out of the 8 councils that were formed at the local level, only 4 are operating. When the pandemic hit, also we had a change in national government. And that always affects how the situation and the governance transition is going, and it was kind of, the pandemic in a way sometimes was used as an excuse to say we cannot have the council meetings. Why not? I thought. The basin committees, the Watersheds case, and I'm going there soon, they were having virtual meetings. So why the fisheries councils couldn't have those meetings? Well, it wasn't a priority, and it hasn't been. And so I think, I think that's a good summary of what's the current situation in terms of this transition. Just to say also, however, that there's one of the councils local councils, which is in inland Uruguay. That one is the one where I heard the most successful stories in terms of defining management measures in collaboration between the fishers and the government, and even defining together where to establish closed areas at a certain time of the year according to the breeding period of the target species and so on. So there can be some success in some of the cases. I'm not familiar with all the councils, just with 2 or 3 of them. So I'm looking forward to getting to know other councils better. Let's now move to water. An important milestone in water governance in Uruguay was in 2004. At that time, we had a referendum for a constitutional reform. That reform was promoted by an organization that was called National Commission in Defense of Water and Life, that involved multiple local organizations and unions in defense of water. And what they were promoting was there were some trends of privatization of water services at the moment, so they wanted to change that, and also they wanted to have social participation in decision making regarding water uses. And so that referendum had over 60% of approval, so that reform took place. And that meant, some of the changes there were that it was the state which would be in charge of water, provision of water, and also sanitation services. And also that reform meant that there should be social participation and user participation in all cases, it says, all instances of water planning, management, and control. Also, the reform proposed taking the watersheds or the basins as the management units and so on. 5 years after this constitutional reform, the National Water Policy, a law, was passed, and it proposes the sustainable use and integrated management and participation in water resource management and so on. Similar to the fisheries case, and let me say that just in case that it was before the fisheries reform, like the governance reform started, councils or committees involving government and non-government actors were formed at different levels or scales. So the law proposed the creation for a national council. In the end, that council wasn't formed because there was another national committee already existing, and so they saw that it was contradictory to form a new one, and there's still some conflict around that. Then 3 regional councils were formed. So all the country, like any part of the country, fits within any of those 3 regional councils. And within those regional councils, you will have basin committees involving particular basins or watersheds. And there are 14 now of those basin committees. How are they formed? Well, they say, so it's basically, that's the categories that the government uses. So they say, well, it's I don't know how to say that in English, tripartite. Does that exist? Oh, good. Yeah, so it's the government, the users, and civil society who are part of the committees. All levels of government are part of the councils, or should be. They don't in practice, like many times local governments aren't there. Users can involve industry sector, farmers organizations of different kinds. And in the civil society group, you may have social organizations, unions, universities, and things like that. There's not a particular number of members that should be there of each sector. It depends on the context, basically. And they are consultative, deliberative, and advisory boards supporting water management and planning. A decree that was passed a few years after the law states the duties of these committees that involve so these committees are expected to contribute to management plans in the basins. They also aim at bringing together the different actors, also to strengthen citizen participation. Well, these are, sorry, but when I read this, it's like so different to what happens in practice. Like, you know, I was on my way here. I was telling Derek that the new director of the water directorate, like in almost every meeting she's there, she would say, "Oh, you are not supposed to talk to one another. You know, you shouldn't start to dialogue." So what should we do? Like, should we just listen to the government presentation? Oh, sorry about that. So basically, so they should contribute to conflict management and all those things. So in 2019, I started a research project funded by the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research that involved 2 watersheds in Uruguay, 2 in Brazil, and 2 in Argentina. And I would just focus on the Uruguayan cases. And soon after that, I started a new project where I looked at the biggest or most important basin in Uruguay in terms of the provision of drinking water for more than half of the population, which is located in Montevideo in the surrounding area, and that was funded by the National Research Agency in Uruguay, and that project just finished now in past December. So the idea now, my plan now, is to share with you some of the findings from the comparative analysis that we've been doing of these 3 cases, where we focused on the basin committees and how these 3 basin committees were operating and how participants perceived the council, the basin committees, sorry. And so we did interviews with many actors of the different groups. We reviewed the minutes of the meetings. We were there at the meetings, virtual meetings and in person, doing participant observation. So we gathered lots of data to assess the councils, and we are still working on the data analysis and publications. So there in the table you can see some descriptive information of the basins themselves. So as you can see, it's can have a tiny, we would say a tiny basin, the one in the middle, Cisne, and the first one, Sauce. Those 2 are located in a single, these are we call department, but it's administrative units in Uruguay. Uruguay is a unitary country. It's divided in 19 units. And so the management is easier when it involves just one subnational government. The one case, the third case, Santa Lucia, that one involves 6 of those subnational governments. It's the one that I said, well, it provides 2 million people with water. In all the cases, there are multiple water users, not just human consumption, but also there's agriculture. There can be industries, livestock production, and of course, as you may expect, multiple conflicts around water use and how to use it, and quality, quantity, and here are some pictures of the 3 cases. In my house, we drink water from the Sauce case in Maldonado, which is going through some water quality issues. And now I will focus on the basin committees. And so the Sauce case was the one that was for the earliest. So that was in 2010. It's also the one that has had the highest number of meetings over the years, because there was a time in which they would meet every month, or then every 2 months. That's not the rule at all for the other cases. It's also the only case in which the committee is in charge of the National Environment Directorate and not the Water Directorate. And that may explain some of the differences because, so the person or the two people in charge of the council are just in charge of that council, whereas in the other cases, all the other 13 basin committees, like they are developed or conducted by a small group of people working at the Water Directorate, and there are not enough like human resources as in the fisheries case. Well, there are different like member organizations. The Santa Lucia Committee, the biggest one or the biggest basin, is the one where there are like more actors and more diversity of stakeholders involved. And the creation of most of these committees was associated with some sort of water crisis or crisis regarding land use affecting the water and the realization that management needed to change and that these committees needed to be formed. In addition, that there was this context of enabling legislation allowing for the creation of the committees. And so we, in the three cases, we analyzed to what extent there was interinstitutional coordination and also collaboration among the actors. And in the three cases, we found that stakeholders of the different groups, they highlighted or they commented that the committees have been useful in improving or increasing coordination because they have the opportunity to see each other more often and to discuss the topics and things like that. Sometimes that increased coordination was between national government organizations. Other times it was more about coordination between national and subnational governments. So that really varied from case to case. There were, we found different examples of collaboration initiatives between government and non-government actors from case to case. However, the South Save case, the first one, the one that was the earliest, it was there where we found the most successful stories and more examples of how they were collaborating, for instance, in implementing monitoring plans in collaboration between the university and the water public company and the environment ministry and things like that. Also, they've been working on the basin plan, the management plan in a collaboratively way. And that's very different from what's happening in the Santa Lucia case, where it was the government, the Water Directorate, which worked on the management plan, and they would bring some of that already, like a totally written document of 200 or 300 pages for the stakeholders to review. And you know what, and Ryan is laughing, they are convinced that the plan was made in a participatory way. So the whole participation thing and how each actor perceives participation is really like different one from the other. And of course that the social, all the non-government actors will say that they were involved in the plan. Not only that, but we found in the interviews that many people didn't know that the plan existed at all. And they were members of the committee. So if the plan really had been made in the committee participatorily and so on, those answers wouldn't have been found, you know? That was really shocking. So conflicts. Well, there are multiple conflicts. It depends like from case to case. However, the Santa Lucia case, the one in which there are also like a higher diversity of actors and opposing interests and things like that, you can see the conflict everywhere. Like at the meetings, in conversations, there's tension, like prevailing tension. It's not that you go to a meeting and you say, oh, here stakeholders are getting together and they are collaborating. No, you will never get that feeling in a meeting. It's like tension from the beginning till the start, to the emails in between. Well, yeah. Actually, in that case, there's no collaboration for the operation of the committee. So it's not that the government asked, what are we going to do next? It's like, what are we going to discuss in the next meeting? Not at all. Like the agenda for the meeting comes from the government. Sometimes they are not even willing to add topics to that list. They would say that there's no time, for instance. Or if there's even a conflictual issue to address, they would get to the meeting and say, we are going to discuss this topic and we will only look at this and this aspect of that huge conflict. That causes discontent, huge discontent. But what's good is that participants are generally willing and open to raise their hand and say, this is not what we want. This is we want to decide what to do in these meetings. We don't want to come and listen what you're bringing and discussing what you want us to discuss because you want to approve this or this hydraulic project, for instance. In the South case, and I'm not talking about the one in the middle because it's kind of in between, but in the South case, they work together on the agenda. Sometimes it's like they're sitting and they're saying, we are starting to think about the agenda, let us know what you would like to include, and things like that. What's the time? Okay, shoot. Participation, well, we look at who's there, who's absent, what actors are missing. Let me just focus on the influence or political impact of the basin committees. There's a main reason for discontent in these councils about their consultative nature and about having no impact. But that discontent is higher in the cases where the committee hasn't done anything or hasn't got to approve any management measures. So, for instance, in the South case, the committee proposed some management measures before there was a basin plan, because they are right now working on that basin plan. And in that committee, stakeholders wouldn't complain all the time about the consultative or advisory nature, because they are seeing that they can kind of get towards what they want in terms of basin management to some extent. Then that's not at all the case in the Santa Lucia Basin, where the committee hasn't contributed that much in terms of basin management. Also, the committees sometimes are bypassed, and so that means that they are not involved or consulted about important decisions or projects that can impact their territory. And that's supposedly something that should be done according to the decree and so on. But in the Cisne Committee and the Santa Lucia Committee, there are multiple cases of bypassing, whereas in the South case, which is more well recognized and it has a more trajectory, the committee is always there when it comes to decisions about the basin. So some considerations from this comparative analysis of the basin committees. To some extent, they have allowed for interinstitutional coordination and collaboration among actors and social participation. However, these are very limited sometimes, and it varies from case to case. Actually, we found that these are very complex settings and there are multiple variables in place. And also we found that scale does matter. So in the Santa Lucia case, where is a larger basin, more stakeholders, more conflicts, it's more laborious to operate a committee, and it has more conflicts and so on. I think this is my last slide. Oh, almost there. Okay, so when we look at the two cases, the fisheries governance transition and what happened with the water sector, and this started in 2004 with the constitutional reform in the case of water, so it's been two decades. So we can say that governance transitions actually take a long time, and it's not an easy process. There are many challenges and barriers, and it's constantly changing. And actually, sometimes national government changes or some national authorities change, and that affects the process. So people, who is there in which role really matters. Well, in both cases, the fisheries councils and the basin committees have contributed to increased collaboration and coordination, like compared to a situation in which there was no interaction between the different actors. However, these multi-stakeholder boards appear to complement instead of replacing the existing centralized and hierarchical governance approach. And so sometimes these councils are bypassed. And the legislation helps, it's useful, but it's not enough. And so the human and financial resources are also important, and they are not planned. I mean, when there's new law, we are going to create this, but there aren't resources allocated for that change. In Uruguay, in the two sectors or the two systems, it seems that the concentration of power in upper government levels hinders this transition towards participatory governance, and there's not really like much conviction that how participation should be and should take place. And another challenge has to do with fragmentation of functions and actions. So there's still lots of conflicts between the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Agriculture, for instance, and things like that. So from those two projects, my colleagues and I in Uruguay, we have realized that we need to pay even further attention to these processes, and including the operation of these multi-stakeholder councils. And we are now about to start in April a new project, which is about the evaluation of deliberative public participation processes related to environment. In general, it's huge, but we are going to choose like cases from different systems, not only fisheries, water, protected areas, and other things. And we will use quality markers or criteria from the public participation literature to assess these as deliberative participatory process. So I think there's potential for more longitudinal analysis of these multi-stakeholder councils and see how they unfold, how they develop, and so on. Thank you very much. I look forward to talking questions and discussions.
Thank you so much, Mika, for a wonderful talk that covered really fascinating